Across the board cuts, these cuts are devastating. Education, if the sequestration is fully implemented, we will have close to 50,000 educators lose their jobs. That's a big deal. So we are working, and the reason why I say this is because this is a big deal regarding the critical need for additional revenue. Now recently, the Congress decided to enact a bill that dealt with the issue of FAA. Many of you might have read the paper about that how quickly the Congress acted when the sequestration was affecting the amount of time you spent on an airplane. We have the Congress and the President quickly acted on the issue of the FAA, but you left out many kids. We care about our kids. It's about kids, not cuts. So Medicaid and Medicare. The Ryan budget essentially voucherized the Medicare program, or in the technical term, they call it premium support. And eventually what it means in English is that the government would provide you a subsidy to go out and purchase health insurance in the private market. Now the only problem with that is, if you go out to the private market, it's not really as good a deal as you would in traditional Medicare. It's very, very difficult. There are a number of different reasons why premiums fluctuate across the country. It has to do with geographic region, demographics, and a number of issues. So we were, the NEA, vigorously opposed the issue of the voucherization of Medicare. And Medicare will continue to be an issue. Many of the budget folks in DC, when they look at the driver of a big cost and expenditures in DC, Medicare is a big one. Now the Affordable Care Act will do a good job long-term in bringing down the cost of health care, but I think the issue of Medicare and how you address that will continue to be an issue that many in Congress will have to deal with. Medicaid, this is a big one. Now why is the NEA involved in Medicaid? Number one, we care about kids. The Medicaid program and the CHIP program are vital programs for many of low-income families that need access to health services. The good news is that the Affordable Care Act expanded coverage for Medicaid, and so many more children will have access to that program. The financial interest is if the federal government does not meet its responsibility to provide subsidies to states and help in implementing the Medicaid expansion, the states have to bear those costs. And so we continue to advocate in Capitol Hill to make sure that the federal government continues to provide funding for Medicaid. Because the issue is, as a state has to pay more and more of the Medicaid expenses, that crowds out money for education funding. But we care a lot about Medicaid. And in the House proposal, what Budget Chair Ryan wanted to do was to block grant Medicaid. That essentially means providing a sum of monies to a state to administer the Medicaid program, and that would be it. And so we are very much opposed to block granting of Medicaid. Now for the issue of the day, Social Security. This is a big one. I spent a lot of time on this issue. So benefit cuts. What kind of benefit cuts is the Congress contemplating? Well, right now we say that the Social Security does not contribute to the deficit one iota. So why is Social Security still part of the discussion? Because Congress wants to explore that issue. And so they're sometimes trying to link the issue of deficit reduction discussions with reforms to entitlements. And that is something that I constantly have to watch. So what are the big issues? I'd say the biggest issue is this issue of what's something called the chain CPI. Many of you might have heard about that. The good news is Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut opposes chain CPI. In fact, he's working to change that to what they call CPIE, which is a better indication of inflation. And then raising the retirement age. Right now at a certain level, it's 67, right? There are reports of increasing that age to 70. And so we vigorously oppose this for a variety of reasons. Number one, it's a benefit cut. But number two, there are many of you in the room, and there are many of our colleagues in the labor movement that have jobs where you can't work until age 70 for a variety of reasons. And a lot of them have to do with the physical stresses of one's job. So not everyone works in an office. Not everyone has the luxury of working late. They're here a lot on Capitol Hill why can't folks just work a little longer? Well, you spend a couple of days, in the classroom, spend a couple of days on the cop beat, spend a couple of days putting out fires. I mean, this is reality. But the other part of it is it does save a little money, but it doesn't save much, and we vigorously oppose that. And cuts would undermine retirement security for many, many Americans. The key thing is retirement security. I think that's one of the biggest issues that the country has to address, especially as we go into the issue of 401k versus DB plan. There are many, many in the baby boomer population, and I'm a Gen Xer, and there are many of my colleagues in the Gen X generation that do not have defined benefit plans. And as a result of the 2008 economic downturn, many of those 401k defined contribution plans will not have adequate funds for retirement. So that bolsters our argument for Social Security. Social Security is the most successful anti-poverty program in the history of our nation. It is not just a retirement security program. It also provides disability benefits and benefits for children and working families. So that's one of the reasons why we care so much about the Social Security program. GPOEP. How many folks in the room know what GPOEP is? There we go. I had a sneaky suspicion you'd know what that is. This is a big issue, and for those who don't know, I can explain it very quickly. The government pension offset is essentially a benefit that reduces the spousal benefit. So you take whatever your pension income would have been, times 2/3, you get a number. That number reduces your Social Security amount that comes in. And we think it's inherently unfair. The other is the windfall elimination provision, which is essentially a 3-tier formula, and it has a reduction if you are a public employee who retires in a state that does not pay into the Social Security system, you will have your Social Security benefit reduced, sometimes 40% or more. The issue here is not your employment solely as a public sector employee. Many of you have worked jobs in the private sector. Many of you. I have family members that are public sector employees and they've had other jobs. So the issue here is your private sector employment. If you have 40 quarters, that makes you eligible for a Social Security benefit, right? And once you're eligible for that benefit, because you're a public sector employee, back in the 80s, the Congress, addressing the issue of Social Security solvency, decided to enact these offsets. And the NEA has been working very hard to say that these issues are unfair and that the Congress ought to fully repeal them going forward. So what are the overall impacts of the offsets? Well, 9 out of 10 affected public employees lose their entire spousal benefit. This is a big one. Why is it big? I've been to many hearings. We had a couple of hearings, a couple of years in the Senate. We had a colleague from Maine she was in her 70s and still teaching because she could not retire because of the GPO. This is a big issue. I'd say the other big issue that I often see are those who retire from a private sector job and then would consider a career in teaching after, say, a career in the engineering field, and then would like to go teach math. And then they hear from someone, maybe someone in this room or a colleague, a friend, say, well, if you take that job, you may be subject to these offsets. And that's a shame, because as you all know, we have a critical need for quality teachers in the classroom. We have a critical need. There are many of you that have retired. We have another cadre of over 1 million NEA members that will be retiring in the next couple of years. And the system really needs as many folks as we can to teach our kids. And so we say that this is unfair, but it also has an education policy component to it. So we have bills in both the House and the Senate, and I have the bill numbers there for you, 1795 in the House and S896 in the Senate. And so now we have a rallying point. This is very key, because we need the rallying point bills so that we can mobilize on the local and state level with your respective members of Congress. And so why is this taking so long? That's the question I always get, right? And here we have, pushing the rock up the hill. Well, one of the issues is the cost involved here. So technically, the repeal of GPO and WEP is in excess of $80 billion. That money technically has to come out of the Social Security Trust Fund. There are a variety of ways you can look at that. One is cutting other benefits to other programs within the program, which present a lot of political challenges. Another way is, I mentioned, the scrap the cap, or amendments to the taxable wage base and the way in which the Social Security Trust Fund is funded. So these are various things that we work with the staffs in both the Finance and Ways and Means Committee to look at some possibilities. And the other is, if it ever happened, was to go to general revenue to help offset the cost of repeal of GPO and WEP. The other is the philosophical disagreements, some in Congress. We have some supporters, we have some adversaries. And there are a variety of reasons for their support or disagreement with us on this issue. And the big one is they're waiting for Social Security comprehensive reform. And why is that so? Because if you address the issue regarding the cost and how you would actually get to repeal or incremental steps towards full repeal of Social Security, that would likely occur in comprehensive reform because all the various aspects of the program would be on the table. And there would be good news and there will be bad news because in politics, as you well know, you've been at this for a while, there has to be a degree of compromise. And so that's why I think if the Congress has a grand bargain regarding deficit reduction or a mini bargain, which is what we'll likely see, Social Security may be on the table. And if it's on the table, the bad news is we may have some of those benefit reduction provisions that we'd have to deal with. The good news is we will make sure that GPO WEP is repeal is part of the equation. So what are some of the ongoing activities? I spent a lot of time lobbying on the issue, but lobbying is good to provide information. There are new members of Congress, there are new staff members, we have to educate them. There are materials, so at the Representative Assembly, there are materials that we put together. There are many of these materials are on the website. If you go to the NEA's Legislative Action Center, we have a Social Security toolkit regarding GPO WEP reform that has materials relating to press statements, talking points, and the language that you can use to write a letter to your congressional member or your senator. But the big one, and media is always a good one too. We worked on with the media a lot to try to highlight this issue. The big one though is engagement. So the NEA Retired has been engaged regarding some of our efforts in the last election cycle, but we're also going to really need you regarding advocacy on a variety of issues, most notably the GPO WEP. So your involvement is critical. We need you to go see your representatives and tell your story. I think the most important thing is to go on the NEA website, get information regarding the issue, but tell your story. You don't have to get into all the technicalities. Keep to the talking point, that especially on the issue of GPO WEP, that these offsets are inherently unfair. And then tell your story, how it affects your everyday life. That's the most important thing you can do to assist on the issues going forward. So you need to take action. So we have a website property called Education Votes. You go to educationvotesnea.org, and on there's a petition. So today, or sometime after this conference, if you get online and go to the section regarding GPO WEP, you can sign up for the petition, advising a member of Congress to sign up to be a co-sponsor. So I think that's the main takeaway from my comments today is, number one, is to get educated on the issues. Number two, to become an advocate on many of these issues, because we need you to go to Congress and tell them your story. Because without that, these issues really won't go anywhere. So I thank you for your time, and it's all about activism, and it's about our kids. I thank you for the work that you've done in the classroom, and that some of you continue to do on behalf of all the kids. I have two children that are 4 and 7 in the system, and I know the work that you put in. I have a great relationship with both teachers for my sons, and I can't thank you enough. Thank you.